There are endings that feel like triumph, and there are endings that taste only of ash. The Tarnished had known both. They had walked beneath the shadow of the Erde tree, felt its golden light fade to amber, then to rust, then to nothing at all. They had raised blade and incantation against gods who wore crowns of stars and rot. They had died 10,000 times, perhaps more, each death teaching them something the living could never learn, that perseverance is not hope, but the refusal to accept silence as an answer. And yet, in the end, even legends must close their eyes. The final blow came not with grand ceremony, but with the quiet sigh of a world too tired to continue. Whether the Tarnished forged a new age or fell defending the last grace of a dying order, the result was the same. The light dimmed. The spectral steed faded into mist. The runes, those golden fragments of ambition and sorrow, scattered like autumn leaves in a wind that had no direction. Death for the Tarnished had always been a doorway. But this time, the door opened onto nothing. No sight of grace awaited. No Melina stood at the threshold with her knowing, melancholy gaze. There was only void, vast, formless, and utterly indifferent. The Tarnished floated, if floating could describe the sensation of being nowhere and everywhere at once. Time had no meaning here. Distance was a lie. Up and down were the fantasies of a universe that obeyed rules, and this place had abandoned all such pretense. The Sea of Souls. The Warp. Though the Tarnished did not yet know its name, they felt its nature immediately. It was not like the spaces between grace. It was not the stillness of death or the cold of the void beyond the stars. This was something alive, something writhing, something that watched with 10 million eyes and hungered with appetites that had no bottom. Colors that should not exist bled into one another. Sounds that were not sounds whispered promises and threats in languages that predated language itself. And yet, above the Tarnished, something flickered. A single point of light. Gold, but not the gold of coins or crowns. This was the gold of dawn breaking over a world that had forgotten what dawn looked like. It was small, so terribly small, like a candle struggling against a hurricane. But it was there. Grace. A fragment of it, perhaps the last fragment, clinging to the Tarnished soul like a child refusing to let go of a parent's hand. The warp currents roared. They were not wind, for wind implies air, implies a world with rules. These were tides of raw emotion, of rage and despair and terrible, insane joy. They crashed against the Tarnished, trying to pull them apart, to dissolve their identity into the screaming chorus of the damned. But the Tarnished had been broken before. They had been shattered by Marjay's cruel staff, crushed beneath Raiden's meteor fall, burned by Melinia's scarlet rot. They had learned that being broken was not the same as being defeated. Their mind, tempered by countless resurrections, held firm. The warp pressed closer, and within it, things began to take notice. Shapes formed in the formless. Faces that were too many faces, limbs that bent in directions that defied geometry, eyes that wept fire and bled laughter. Demons. Creatures born from the psychic screams of a galaxy at war, entities that fed on terror and ambition and every shade of mortal failing. They circled the Tarnished like sharks sensing blood in water. But they hesitated. Something was wrong. Souls in the warp were meant to be raw, screaming, delicious in their vulnerability. This soul was different. It had been broken, yes, but then reforged. It had been touched by gods outer gods whose names the warp did not recognize, whose power tasted of something outside the great game. The Tarnished belonged to no pantheon the demons knew. They were not chaos, but neither were they the rigid, gold-clad certainty of the corpse emperor's Imperium. They were other, and in the warp, other was the most dangerous thing to be. The demons drew closer still, curiosity overcoming caution. One reached out with a limb that was part claw, part smoke, part the memory of a scream. It touched the flickering grace above the Tarnished's head and recoiled, shrieking. The light had burned it, not with fire, but with something the demon could not comprehend. Purity without dogma. Hope without illusion. The grace was weak, nearly extinguished, but it was absolute in its nature. It did not compromise. It did not bend. It simply was, and in being, it rejected everything the warp tried to impose. The Tarnished opened their eyes, though whether they had eyes in this place was debatable. They saw the demons, saw the screaming void, saw the impossible geometries of a realm that should not exist, and they felt something familiar rise within them. Not fear. The Tarnished had abandoned fear somewhere around their 50th death. Recognition. These were enemies. Twisted, incomprehensible, blasphemous against every natural law, but still enemies. And the Tarnished had spent lifetimes learning how to kill enemies. Their spectral steed was gone. Their weapons had dissolved with their body. Their runes, those precious fragments of power, had scattered to whatever winds existed beyond the lands between. But their resolve remained. Their will, forged in the crucible of endless death and resurrection, burned brighter than any grace. The demons sensed this and began to swarm. The Tarnished did not run. Running had never been their way. Instead, they reached inward, to the place where memory becomes will, where will becomes reality. In the warp, thought and existence were not separate things. Here, belief could be weapon. Determination could be armor. A shape formed in the Tarnished's hand. Spectral, translucent, but growing more solid with each heartbeat. If the Tarnished still had a heart to beat, it was a blade. Not the exact blade they had carried in life, but the idea of that blade, the essence of every weapon they had ever wielded. Greatsword or katana, colossal hammer or sacred seal, the form flickered, uncertain, but the purpose was clear. To fight. To persist. To refuse the void. The first demon lunged, and the Tarnished moved with muscle memory that transcended flesh. They sidestepped, parried, struck. The spectral blade connected with warp stuff and found purchase. The demon shrieked, not in pain but in confusion. Souls did not fight back. Souls screamed and broke and were consumed. This soul had forgotten how to break. More demons came. The Tarnished died, torn apart by claws and teeth and impossible geometries. But death here was different than death in the lands between. There was no site of grace to return to, no Melina to guide them back. Instead, the tiny flickering light above them pulsed once, twice, and the Tarnished reformed. Ho! Ready. They fought again. Died again. Returned again. The warp, which had seen countless billions perish and dissolve, had never seen this. A soul that died and came back, not through the intervention of the Chaos Gods, not through sorcery or pact, but through sheer stubborn refusal to stay dead. Each resurrection sent ripples through the Imperium, confusing the currents, warping the laws that were not laws. And far away in their realms of madness and dominion, 4 vast presences turned their attention toward the anomaly. Khorne, the blood god, saw a warrior who fought without end, who rose from death to kill again. He felt something almost like approval. This soul understood that existence was struggle, that the only truth was violence. Perhaps it could be claimed. Perhaps it could be shaped into a champion worthy of the Skull Throne. Sensei, the architect of fate, sensed a thread that did not belong in his great weaving. This soul's destiny had been written in another cosmos, under different stars. It was a variable that should not exist, an equation with no solution. He was intrigued. He was disturbed. He began to calculate how this anomaly might be used or eliminated. Nurgle, the grandfather of plague, observed a soul that had been broken 10,000 times yet refused to decay. It did not rot. It did not despair. It simply persisted, like a flower growing through corpse soil. He found it fascinating. He found it offensive. Nothing should resist entropy forever. Perhaps this soul needed to learn the peace of acceptance. Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, reached out with senses that tasted desire and ambition. But this soul was strange. It had ambition. Yes, it had conquered gods and claimed thrones. But there was no hunger in it. No need to possess, to dominate, to consume. It fought because fighting was necessary, not because fighting brought joy. Slaanesh withdrew unsatisfied. A soul without desire was a soul that could not be corrupted. The Tarnished knew none of this. They only knew the fight, the endless dance of death and resurrection that had defined their existence since they first opened their eyes in the lands between. The demons kept coming. The Tarnished kept rising. And somewhere in the howling darkness of the Imperium, the tiny light of grace continued to flicker, refusing to go out. The warp does not obey time, but if it did, one might say days passed. Or centuries. Or heartbeats. The Tarnished fought and in fighting began to understand the strange rules of this new battlefield. In the lands between, death had always been a teacher. Each encounter with Margit taught timing. Each loss to millennia revealed openings. Death was curriculum, and resurrection was the opportunity to apply what had been learned. Here, in the screaming void, the lesson continued. The demons were not like the demi-humans or grafted soldiers of the old world. They did not follow predictable patterns. They were thought given teeth, emotion given claws. A demon of rage moved with pure aggression, no defense, only the drive to kill. A demon of despair moved slowly, inevitably, dragging its victims down into hopelessness. A demon of excess danced and laughed, attacking from impossible angles with weapons that were also caresses, also promises. The Tarnished learned to read them. Not as creatures, but as concepts. Rage could be redirected. Despair could be endured. Excess could be met with discipline. Their spectral weapon grew more solid with each battle. It was as if the act of fighting, of asserting will against the formless chaos, gave the blade reality. Sometimes it was a great sword, massive and brutal, falling like judgment upon demons that thought themselves safe. Sometimes it was a katana, quick and precise, finding the seams in warp stuff where unmaking was possible. Sometimes it was a colossal hammer that struck with the weight of mountains, or a staff that channeled bursts of golden light grace, manifesting as weapon, as shield, as defiance against the dark. The Tarnished died often. A demon with too many mouths swallowed them whole. A tendril of pure madness pierced their skull and boiled their thoughts. A greater demon, vast as a city, crushed them beneath a hoof forged from the broken dreams of saints. Each time the grace flickered. Each time the Tarnished returned. And each time the demons grew more unsettled. There were hierarchies in the warp, pecks and orders established through eons of conflict. Lesser demons fed on scraps of emotion. Greater demons commanded legions. Demon princes, once mortal champions elevated to immortal monstrosity, ruled realms within their patrons' domains. But all of them, from the smallest horror to the mightiest lord, understood one fundamental truth. In the warp, death was transformation, not ending. A demon slain would return, eventually, reborn from the psychic currents that had spawned it. But the demons did not resurrect like this. They did not snap back into existence seconds after being unmade, ready to fight again. That was something else. That was wrong. A herald of Khorne, a bloodletter with a blade that wept crimson steam, manifested before the Tarnished. It did not attack immediately. Instead, it studied the warrior with eyes that burned like forged coals. "You die well," the demon said, its voice the sound of swords grinding against bone. "You rise well. The blood god watches. He offers you a place in his legion. Endless war, eternal glory, skulls without number." The Tarnished, standing in armor that was more memory than metal, regarded the demon with calm, tired eyes. "I've had enough of endless war," they replied, their voice carrying the weight of 10,000 deaths. "I fought to end it, not to serve it." The bloodletter cocked its head, confused. To refuse Khorne was to refuse truth. Battle was the only reality. How could a warrior not understand this? "Then you are a fool," the demon hissed, and attacked. The Tarnished parried the first strike, rolled beneath the second, and countered with a thrust that pierced the demon's chest. Golden light flared at the point of impact, and the bloodletter screamed not in rage, but in something that almost resembled fear. The light did not belong in the warp. It was anathema to everything here, a splash of order in an ocean of chaos. The demon dissolved, banished back to the realm of its master. The Tarnished stood alone again, breathing heavily though they were not certain they still breathed and felt the grace pulse above them. It was weaker now. Each resurrection drained it a little more. The light that had once illuminated entire valleys beneath the Erde tree was now barely a candle flame. But it persisted. As long as the Tarnished persisted, it persisted. More demons came. A pink horror, giggling madly, split into 2 blue horrors when struck, then 4 brimstone horrors when those were killed. The Tarnished adapted, learning to strike each fragment simultaneously, denying the multiplication. A plague-bearer, rotting and patient, exhaled disease that should have melted flesh from bone. The Tarnished felt the sickness try to take root, felt it recoil from the grace that still clung to their soul like morning dew. They fought a demon that was a living riddle, whose every strike posed a question that fractured sanity. The Tarnished, who had solved the puzzle towers of Liurnia and deciphered the secrets of ancient dragons, found the patterns and cut through them. They fought a demon that was pure seduction, promising an end to struggle, an eternity of rest. The Tarnished, who had refused the temptations of gods and queens, walked past the illusion and struck true. Each victory taught them more about this realm. The warp was not truly formless, it was too much form, all possibilities existing at once. To fight here was to impose singular will upon infinite chaos. The Tarnished, who had learned discipline under the tutelage of death itself, found they were uniquely suited to this task. But the warp was learning too. A greater demon manifested, towering above the Tarnished like a blasphemous monument. It had the body of a serpent, the wings of a bat, and a face that shifted between beautiful and horrific with each breath. This was a demon prince, a mortal who had ascended through devotion to the dark gods, now wielding power that could crack worlds. "You do not belong," the demon prince rumbled, its voice the grinding of tectonic plates. "You are not of chaos, you are not of order, you are an error. You will be corrected." The Tarnished raised their spectral blade, which in this moment had taken the form of a great curved sword wreathed in holy light. "I've been an error since the day I was born," they said quietly. "It hasn't stopped me yet." The battle that followed would have been sung in legend, if legends could form in the warp. The demon prince struck with power that reshaped reality around each blow. The Tarnished died 17 times in the first exchange. Each time they rose faster, learning the pattern, finding the rhythm. On the 18th resurrection, they landed their first true strike, opening a wound in the demon's flank that bled not blood, but screaming warp stuff. The demon prince roared and called upon reinforcements. Lesser demons swarmed from tiers in space, dozens of them, then hundreds. The Tarnished stood at the center of a maelstrom of claws and teeth and madness. They fought as they had fought in the lands between, methodically, precisely, treating each enemy as a problem to be solved rather than a threat to be feared. They died again. And again. And again. But with each death, the demons grew more desperate. This soul was not weakening. It was learning. It was adapting. And worst of all, it was making the demons doubt. Doubt is poison to creatures of absolute conviction. Demons do not question. They embody their nature with perfect clarity. But watching a soul refuse to break, refuse to be consumed, refuse to play by the rules that governed the great gamut introduced a hairline fracture in their certainty. The demon prince finally fell, dispersing into the warp with a scream of fury and confusion. The lesser demons fled. And the Tarnished stood alone once more, their spectral armor cracked, their blade barely holding form, the grace above them flickering like a star at the edge of death. They were exhausted. Not physically, they were not certain they still had a physical body, but spiritually. The kind of exhaustion that came from fighting without hope of victory, only the determination not to lose. It reminded them of the early days in the lands between, when every step forward was paid for in blood and failure, when the path to becoming Elden Lord seemed impossible, laughable, a cruel joke told by uncaring gods. They had walked it anyway, and they would walk this one too. The warp churned around them, and in the distance they saw something new. A tear in the fabric of unreality. Through it they glimpsed something solid, something real. A ship, impossibly vast, carved from metal and Gothic faith. The Tarnished did not know what it was, but it was a destination. And in the formless void, a destination was everything. They began to move toward it, one impossible step at a time, the dying light of grace guiding them forward. The black ships were nightmares given form, vessels that sailed the warp to collect cursed souls and deliver them to terror for purposes too grim for common citizens to know. Crewed by Null Maidens, Sisters of Silence, whose very presence was anathema to the psychic, these ships hunted witches and psykers across the Imperium, dragging them into sanctified holds where their screams could not breach reality. Captain Theodosia Carvan had served aboard the Unspoken Vow for 43 years. She had witnessed horrors that would shatter lesser mind psykers who imploded into warp portals, demons that wore the skins of captured crew, entire decks corrupted by the briefest touch of chaos. She considered herself beyond surprise. Then the sensors detected the anomaly. It was not a ship, not wreckage, not even a demonic manifestation exactly. The readings made no sense. Something with the psychic signature of a blank one of the rare, soul-dead pariahs whose existence nullified the warp but also radiating a field of energy that the cogitators could not classify. It was dim, fading, but persistent. "Bring us alongside," Carvan ordered. "Prepare containment protocol." The black ship's navigator, his third eye closed and weeping from the strain of steering through the warp's tides, reported confusion. "Captain, the warp recoils from it but also reaches for it. I don't understand. It's as if space itself cannot decide what this thing is." "Then we'll decide for it," Carvan said. "Deploy the null field. Bring it aboard." The extraction was routine, mechanically speaking. Servitors extended grappling claws. Null Maidens formed a perimeter, their presence dampening any psychic backlash. The object, no, the person, they realized was pulled from the warp into the material world. The moment the Tarnished manifested fully in real space, alarms screamed throughout the ship. They hung suspended in the cargo hold, held by magnetic clamps, wearing armor that defied immediate classification. It was not Astartes plate, not Imperial Guard carapace, not Xeno's tech exactly, though it bore no resemblance to any known human manufacture. The metal, if it was metal, seemed old, impossibly old, carved with symbols that hurt to look at too long. Above their head, a faint golden light flickered. The tech priests arrived within minutes, their mechadendrites clicking with excitement and apprehension. They scanned the figure with every tool at their disposal: auspex, genitor, probes, blessed instruments that detected warp taint. The results were contradictory and impossible. "No warp contamination," reported Margot's Septima 7, his voice a vox-filtered monotone. "Yet emerged from warp, no identifiable gene seed markers, yet human baseline, mostly. Armor composition unknown. Materials do not match any STC pattern, weapons none detected. Yet sensor ghosts suggest armament exists in quantum state." "Speak clearly, Magos," Carvan demanded. The tech priest rotated his head 180 degrees, photoreceptors whirring. "This should not exist, Captain. By every law of materium and immaterium, this individual should have been consumed within seconds of warp exposure, yet they persist. Stable. Impossible. I recommend immediate vivisection to discern. No." The word came from Sister Superior Usara, one of the Null Maidens. She could not speak aloud. The Sisters of Silence were sworn to voicelessness, but she signed rapidly in battle cant. Her subordinate translated. "The Sister Superior says, 'That light above its head burns like the Emperor's grace. We will not desecrate what may be holy.'" The tech priest emitted a burst of binaric irritation but withdrew. Carvan approached the suspended figure carefully. They were unconscious, or appeared to be. Their face, what little was visible beneath a worn helm, seemed human enough. No mutations, no third eyes or tentacles or other obvious signs of corruption. They looked tired, battle-worn. The kind of exhaustion that came from wars measured in years, not hours. "Wake it," Carvan ordered. Stim chemicals were administered. The Tarnished's eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the harsh lumens of the cargo hold. They saw the tech priests, the Null Maidens, the servitors, and Captain Carvan standing with a bolt pistol drawn. The Tarnished assessed the situation with practiced calm. Armed guards. Unknown location. Restrained. They had been in worse positions. "Who are you?" Carvan demanded in Gothic, the lingua franca of the Imperium. The Tarnished heard the words, understood the tone threat, demand, authority, but the language was foreign. They responded in their own tongue, the ancient speech of the lands between. I mean no harm, I am lost. I seek only to understand where I am. The words were incomprehensible to everyone present. Mygos Septima 7 recorded the audio, his cogitators running linguistic analysis. No match. Not Low Gothic, not High Gothic, not Xeno's language in any database. Carvan frowned. It speaks an unknown language, possible Xeno's collaborator, possible warp-touched. Begin interrogation protocols. The tech priests brought forward a device, a crown of wires and needles designed to extract information directly from neural tissue. It was not gentle. It was not meant to be. The moment it touched the Tarnished's head, the device exploded. Not with fire, but with a burst of golden light. The tech priests recoiled, their sensors overloading. The Null Maidens raised their weapons, sensing hostile action. But the Tarnished had not moved. They looked confused, apologetic even. "Warp sorcery," one of the tech priests shouted.
"No," Sister Superior Usara signed quickly.
"No war presence, something else, something older." Carvan's finger tightened on her bolt pistol's trigger. This was spiraling beyond her understanding, and when the unknown revealed itself aboard a black ship, protocol was clear: purge it. Before she could fire, an astropath arrived, summoned by the psychic disturbance. He was an old man, his eye sockets sewn shut, his robes marked with protective wards. He navigated by psychic sense, by the currents of the warp that normal humans could not perceive. He entered the cargo hold and immediately screamed, not in pain, in awe, in terror. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "What do you sense?" Carvan demanded. "Light," the astropath gasped. "Pure light. Not the Emperor's light, something else, but it burns. It burns like staring into a sun that should not exist. This soul is not of our realm, not of our cosmos. It is clean, impossibly clean. And that light above its head is a beacon, a grace, a—" He cut off, blood trickling from beneath his sealed eyelids. "I cannot look longer, it will blind me beyond the flesh." Carvan holstered her bolt pistol, mind racing. A soul that emerged from the warp uncorrupted, a light that burned astropaths but showed no sign of chaos, armor and biology that matched no known template. This was beyond her authority.
"Send word to the Inquisition," she ordered.
"Tell them we have recovered something that may be relic, heretic, or saint. We require immediate judgment." The Tarnished, still suspended and restrained, watched the frantic activity with the patient calm of someone who had learned long ago that panic solved nothing. They did not understand the language. They did not understand the technology. But they understood the looks.
Fear.
Confusion.
Oh.
They had seen those looks before, in the eyes of merchants in Limgrave, soldiers at Castle Morn, scholars in Raya Lucaria. The look of people confronting something that did not fit their understanding of the world. The Tarnished had been an outsider from the moment they were branded as Tarnished. They had learned to live with it. They could learn to live with it again. The asterisk unspoken vow asterisk altered course, making for the nearest inquisitorial fortress. In their holding cell, the Tarnished sat quietly, the faint grace above their head pulsing in the darkness like a dying star refusing to surrender to the void. The fortress hung in high orbit above a dead world, a Gothic cathedral carved from asteroid rock and reinforced with adamantium faith. It belonged to the Ordo Malleus, the demon hunters, the inquisitors who specialized in the threats that emerged from the warp itself. If anyone in the Imperium could make sense of the anomaly recovered by the asterisk unspoken vow asterisk, it would be them. Inquisitor Matthias Kale arrived within 3 days, accompanied by a retinue that included a battle psyker, a death cult assassin, and a tech priest specialized in identifying here-tech artifact. Kale was Puritan to his bones, a man who believed that the only good Xenos was a dead Xenos, the only safe psyker was a sanctioned one, and the only proper response to the unknown was fire. He studied the reports during the journey, emerged from warp. Unknown armor. Unknown language. Psychic light that resembled the Emperor's grace but predated any known Imperial contact. Every instinct he had cultivated over 40 years of hunting heretics screamed that this was dangerous. When he finally stood before the Tarnished cell, his expression was carved from stone. The Tarnished sat on a bare metal bench. Unbound new Captain Carvan had decided restraints were pointless after they had demonstrated no aggression and looked up at the Inquisitor with tired, patient eyes. Cale gestured to his battle psyker, a woman whose skull was inscribed with protective wards and whose eyes glowed with barely contained power.
Read it.
The psyker extended her consciousness toward the Tarnished, reaching out with psychic senses to probe their thoughts, their intentions, their soul. The moment she made contact, she gasped and staggered backward, blood pouring from her nose. Inquisitor, it's not hostile, but there's a wall not of malice but of... She struggled for words. It's like trying to read the mind of a mountain, solid, ancient, impenetrable, and beneath that, I sense deaths, thousands of deaths, but no guilt, no trauma, just acceptance. Cale's frown deepened. A warrior then, one who has killed extensively. No, the psyker said, wiping blood from her face. I think it's died, not killed. Died, thousands of times, and come back. Each death is a scar, but also a lesson. I've never felt anything like it. Cale turned to his tech priest. Can it be identified? The tech priest had been running scans continuously since arriving.
Negative, Inquisitor. Gene sequence is human.
But with anomalies that suggest either mutation or evolutionary pressure from an unclassified source. The armor's machine spirit does not respond to litanies. The material composition shifts under analysis, as if it exists partially in another state of matter. I believe it is not technology, but will given form. Warp sorcery, Cale concluded. Perhaps, or perhaps something that predates our understanding of the warp entirely. Cale dismissed the speculation with a gesture. He approached the cell's force field barrier and spoke in Gothic, his voice hard and unyielding. You will swear allegiance to the God Emperor of mankind. You will submit to full interrogation and genetic recoding. You will serve the Imperium, or you will be destroyed. These are your only options. The Tarnished heard the tone demand, threat, ultimatum, but the words were still foreign. They responded in their own language, keeping their voice calm and measured. I do not serve gods. I have killed gods. I seek only to understand this place and, if possible, to leave it in peace. The translator servitor attempted to pass the words, failed, and emitted a burst of erracant. Cale's patience, never abundant, evaporated. It refuses to communicate. It refuses to submit. This is evidence of either demonic influence or Xeno's corruption. He turned to his retinue. Prepare the cleansing rite. We will burn whatever warp taint clings to it and see what remains. The death cult assassin, a woman whose body was a canvas of ritual scars, stepped forward with an eviscerator, a massive chain blade designed to carve through armor and flesh with equal ease. The Tarnished watched her approach and felt a familiar tension. They had seen this before. The moment before combat. The instant when words failed and steel became the only language. They stood slowly, hands open, showing no weapons. The assassin struck, the eviscerator screaming through the air in a horizontal arc designed to bisect the Tarnished at the waist. The Tarnished moved. Not with panic, but with practiced precision. They stepped inside the arc, too close for the blade to gain momentum, and struck the assassin's wrist with an open palm. The eviscerator clattered to the floor. Before the assassin could recover, the Tarnished swept her legs and gently set her down. No killing blow. No brutality. Just efficiency and restraint. Every weapon in the room turned toward them. Stand down, Cale shouted, more shocked than angry. The Tarnished had disarmed a death cult assassin warriors trained from birth to kill without harming her. That required skill. That required discipline. That required something the Inquisitor had not expected. Mercy. The Tarnished raised their hands in a gesture that needed no translation. Peace. Surrender. No threat. Kale stared at them for a long moment, re-evaluating. A new voice entered the chamber, calm and measured. I would advise against executing this one, Matthias. Inquisitor Octavia Venn stepped into the cell block. She was Kale's opposite in every way, radical where he was Puritan, curious where he was dogmatic. She studied the Tarnished with interest rather than suspicion. "It is an abomination," Kale said flatly. "It is a mystery," Venn countered, "and we do not solve mysteries by burning them." She approached the force field, studying the faint golden light above the Tarnished's head. "That light! I have seen references to such things in forbidden texts, pre-Imperial mythologies, legends of warriors who bore divine favor from gods that were not gods, powers that existed before the warp was poisoned by the war in heaven." "Heresy," Kale said. "History," Venn replied. "There is a difference." She looked at the Tarnished directly. "If you can understand me, even in concept, raise your right hand." The Tarnished hesitated, then raised their right hand. Venn smiled slightly. "Good. Now do you serve the Chaos Gods?" The Tarnished recognized something in her tone, a question, a request for information. They shook their head. "Do you intend harm to humanity?" Another head shake. "Do you wish to leave this place?" A nod. Venn turned to Kale. "It understands more than it speaks. It is intelligent, non-hostile, and it has demonstrated restraint when it could have killed." She gestured to the assassin, who was climbing to her feet, humiliated but unharmed.
"I propose an alternative. We test it."
"How?" Kale demanded.
We can.
The room fell silent. Venn continued, her voice academic. "The reports state that it emerged from the warp intact, which should be impossible. The Psyker sensed thousands of deaths in its past. I want to see if it truly is undying, or if that was metaphor." Kale considered. It was ruthless. It was logical. It was, in its way, merciful. A quick death to determine truth was better than prolonged torture.
Very well,
he said. They brought the Tarnished to an execution chamber, a bare room with drains in the floor. The Tarnished understood what was happening. They had been here before, in spirit if not in form. The moment before the executioner's blade, the instant before death. They knelt without being asked, calm and accepting. A servo skull floated nearby, recording everything. Kale's assassin stepped forward, eviscerator reactivated. This time, the Tarnished did not resist. The blade fell. The Tarnished's head separated from their body. Blood pooled. The corpse collapsed. The grace above them flickered, pulsed, and the Tarnished gasped, whole and alive, kneeling in the same position. The execution chamber erupted into chaos. Tech priests shouted in binary. The Psyker wept. The assassin dropped her weapon and made the sign of the Aquila, the Imperium's holy symbol. Kale stared, his world of certainties cracking. What? What manner of sorcery? Venn was smiling. Not with joy, but with the satisfaction of a theory confirmed.
Not sorcery, something deeper, something older.
She approached the Tarnished, who looked at her with eyes that held no anger, only a quiet, profound weariness. "You cannot die," Venn said softly. "Or rather, you can, but death has lost its claim on you." She turned to Kale. "This changes everything." Kale, to his credit, adapted quickly. If it cannot die, it cannot be controlled by threat of death. If it cannot be controlled, it is a risk. He drew his bolt pistol. "I recommend immediate." "No," Venn interrupted. "I recommend we give it a choice." She knelt before the Tarnished, meeting their eyes. "You are not of this world. That much is clear. But this world is vast, and full of wars that never end. Perhaps you can find purpose here, or perhaps you can find escape, but you will not find it in this cell." The Tarnished understood the intent, if not every word. They nodded slowly. Venn stood. "I will take responsibility for it. If it proves treacherous, my life is forfeit. But I believe we may have found something rare, a weapon that cannot be destroyed, a warrior without allegiance to chaos, and a soul that may hold secrets from before the age of strife." Kale did not agree. But he was a practical man. And in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, practical men understood that sometimes the most dangerous gamble was refusing to take any risk at all. "Keep it under surveillance," he ordered. "And pray to the Emperor that your intuition is wiser than my experience." The Tarnished remained kneeling, the grace above their head burning just a little brighter, as if sensing that perhaps in this dark future there might still be a path worth walking. The unspoken vow had returned to patrol routes, escorting Inquisitor Ven's personal vessel the frigate Merciful Truth through the warp lanes near the Freenose sector. It was supposed to be routine. 3 days of warp travel, minimal turbulence, nothing to threaten a well-warded black ship. The warp had other intentions. On the second day, the Geller fields flickered. For a ship traveling through the Imperium, the Geller field was the only thing separating crew from madness and death. It projected a bubble of real space around the vessel, a pocket of sanity in an ocean of insanity. When it flickered, even for a microsecond, the warp leaped in. And chaos always waited for such moments. Captain Carvan felt it before the alarm sounded, a wrongness in the air, a taste like copper and ashes. She was on the bridge within seconds, shouting orders. "Reinforce the Geller generators, all hands to battle stations, where's the breach?" The response came from a junior officer, his voice cracking with terror. "Deck 17, Captain, the holding cells. Something's come through." Carvan's blood went cold. Deck 17 was where they kept the most dangerous cargo. Psychers awaiting transport to Terra. Heretical artifacts secured in null vaults. And the Tarnished still under observation. She activated the Vox to Inquisitor Ven, who had been aboard the Merciful Truth *. "Inquisitor, we have a warp breach. Your guest may be in danger." Ven's response was immediate. "I'm coming aboard. Hold position and do not, under any circumstances, kill the Tarnished if they're involved. Understood?" Carvan wanted to argue but knew better. Understood. On Deck 17, reality was coming apart. The breach had opened in the center of the corridor, a tear in space that bled colors that had no names. From it poured demons' bloodletters with brass collars and hell-forged blades, horrors that giggled and split, plague-bearers that spread disease with every breath. The few guards stationed on the deck opened fire immediately, but lasguns were kindling against warp spawn. The first guard died screaming. The second managed to trigger the bulkhead seals before a bloodletter's sword opened him from throat to groin. In the observation cell, the Tarnished felt the breach before they saw it. The air grew heavy. The grace above their head pulsed, agitated. They had felt this before, in the Imperium. The presence of demons. The cell's force field died as power fluctuated. The Tarnished stood, moving to the door. They could hear screaming, could smell blood and rot and the acrid stench of the warp. They had no weapons. Their armor was still the spectral half-real thing they had manifested in the void. But they had fought demons before. And more importantly, they had something the demons wanted. The grace. They stepped into the corridor and saw carnage. Bodies torn apart. Walls weeping blood that was also laughter. Demons feeding on the terror of dying mortals. It reminded them of the Scarlet Rot's corruption in Caelid, or the madness that infected the Shaded Castle. Suffering without reason, destruction for its own sake. The Tarnished had spent an entire journey learning to hate such things. A bloodletter noticed them and charged, drawn by the light that clung to their form. The demon swung its blade in an overhead arc, aiming to split the Tarnished from crown to pelvis. The Tarnished sidestepped, not with supernatural speed, but with perfect timing. The blade missed by inches, and the Tarnished's fist wrapped in spectral force and faint golden light struck the demon's chest. The effect was immediate and violent. The light burned into warp flesh like acid into mortal skin. The bloodletter shrieked and staggered back, confused. It was a creature of corn. It knew no fear. But this pain was different. This was not the pain of glorious battle. This was the pain of being unmade. The Tarnished pressed forward. They had no blade, not yet, but their hands became weapons. Each strike carried the weight of grace, each touch anathema to the immaterial. A plague-bearer lunged at them, vomiting pestilence. The Tarnished caught its arm, twisted, threw it against the wall. Where their hands had touched, the demon's flesh smoked and dissolved. More demons emerged from the breach. Too many. Even for the Tarnished. They died, torn apart by claws and blades. The grace pulsed. They returned, standing in the exact spot they had fallen, and immediately resumed fighting. The demons hesitated. This was wrong. This violated the laws of the Imperium. Mortals did not resurrect instantly. That was the privilege of the warp. A pink horror, cackling madly, launched itself at the Tarnished. They caught it mid-leap, slammed it to the ground, and drove an elbow into its skull. The horror split into two blue horrors, which immediately attacked. The Tarnished fought both simultaneously, their movements economical and precise. No wasted motion. No panic. Just the cold, practiced efficiency of someone who had learned combat in the harshest school imaginable. They died again. A bloodletter's blade found their throat. They returned. By now, the demons were beginning to understand. This soul was the anomaly they had sensed in the warp. The one that resisted. The one that defied. And here, in real space, with the grace strengthening in response to their presence, the Tarnished was even more dangerous. A spectral weapon began to form in their hands. It started as nothing, then mist, then light, then solid matter. The form shifted greatsword, then katana, then twin blades, as if the Tarnished's muscle memory could not decide which weapon best suited this moment. Finally, it settled on a large curved sword, two-handed, wreathed in golden fire. The Tarnished swung, and a demon's head separated from its body. The blade cut through warp stuff as easily as mortal flesh, leaving trails of light in the air that burned like miniature suns. The corridor became a killing field. The Tarnished advanced step by step, each swing measured, each death temporary but educational. They learned which demons split when struck, which ones regenerated, which ones fled. They adapted as they had always adapted. Behind them, the breach continued to widen. That was the real problem. The demons were infinite. The Tarnished could fight forever, but the breach would eventually consume the entire ship. They needed to close it, but they had no idea how. That was when the Space Marines arrived. The sound came first, the heavy, rhythmic thunder of ceramite boots on metal decking. Then the chanting, low and grim, a litany of battle prayers in high Gothic. Then the Marines themselves, emerging from the sealed bulkhead at the far end of the corridor. They were Grey Knights, the Imperium's demon slayers, warriors whose genetic code was proof against corruption and whose weapons were forged to kill the unkillable. 5 of them, moving in perfect formation, their nemesis force weapons crackling with psychic power. The lead knight, a Justicar with a helmet carved to resemble a stern, judging face, saw the scene and immediately assessed. Demons, breach, civilian casualties, and a lone figure fighting at the breach's edge with a sword made of light. "Who is that?" one of the Marines demanded. "Unknown," the Justicar replied. "But they fight demons. That makes them ally until proven otherwise. Advance." The Grey Knights charged, and the corridor became Hell's battlefield. Where the Tarnished fought with precision, the Marines fought with overwhelming force. Their nemesis swords cut through demons like wheat before the scythe. Their storm bolters fired sanctified rounds that exploded warp flesh into ichor and screams. They chanted the Emperor's name, and the words themselves were weapons, forcing demons to recoil. The Tarnished, fighting alongside them now, felt a strange kinship. These were warriors like the Cleanrot Knights or Radons, Redmane's disciplined, fearless, fighting for something greater than themselves. A greater demon began to push through the breach, a lord of change, a monstrosity of feathers and eyes and impossible geometries. It spread wings that trailed warp fire and began to chant a spell that would detonate every mind on the deck. The Tarnished moved without thought. They had fought demigods before. They had killed dragons and gods and things that defied categorization. This was just another boss. They leaped, impossibly high, grace-light trailing behind them like a comet's tail. Their blade came down on the Lord of Change's skull in a two-handed overhead strike, and the impact was not just physical, it was conceptual. Grace against chaos. Order against madness. The demon shrieked, not in pain but in fury. This mortal should not have been able to harm it. It was a fragment of Tzintish himself, a being of pure warp energy. But the Tarnished's blade cut deep, and golden fire poured into the wound. The Grey Knights seized the moment. The Justicar drove his nemesis sword into the demon's chest. Another knight fired a bolt round into its eye. A third chanted a banishment ritual, his voice rising over the chaos. The Lord of Change unraveled, dissipating into screaming fragments of potential and lies. The breach began to close. The remaining lesser demons, sensing their anchor to real space weakening, fled back into the warp. Within moments, the corridor was silent except for the hiss of damaged systems and the drip of unidentifiable fluids. The Tarnished stood among the carnage, their swords still burning with faint light, breathing heavily. They were exhausted. They were wounded. But they were alive. The Grey Knights turned as one to face them, weapons still active. The Justicar spoke, his voice amplified by his helmet's vox. "Identify yourself." The Tarnished did not understand the words, but they understood the intent. They lowered their blade, let it dissolve back into mist, and raised their hands in a gesture of peace. The Justicar studied them for a long moment. Then, slowly, he deactivated his nemesis sword and removed his helmet. His face was hard, scarred, ancient, despite the rejuvenate treatments that kept Space Marines ageless. But his eyes were not hostile. They were considering. "You fought well," he said, knowing the words would not be understood but saying them anyway. "For a mortal, you fought impossibly well." He made the sign of the Aquila, a gesture of respect between warriors. The Tarnished, recognizing the intent if not the form, bowed slightly at the waist. A gesture from the lands between. A gesture of equals acknowledging each other's skill. Inquisitor Ven arrived moments later, stepping over debris and corpses. She saw the Grey Knights. She saw the closed breach. She saw the Tarnished battered but standing. She smiled faintly. "I see my investment has proven valuable." The Justicar turned to her. "Inquisitor, explain what that was." Ven looked at the Tarnished, at the fading grace light above their head, and said simply, "That, Brother Justicar, was hope, and in the 41st millennium, hope is the rarest weapon of all." The * Merciful Truth * docked with the Grey Knight strike cruiser * Titans, Wrath * for joint debriefing. What had occurred aboard the * Unspoken Vow * demanded explanation, categorization, and if necessary extermination. The Grey Knights were not known for their tolerance of anomalies. They existed to purge demons and those who trafficked with them. The fact that they had not immediately executed the Tarnished spoke to their discipline, not their trust. Brother Justicar Ralkan, commander of the Grey Knights strike team, reviewed the picked captures in silence. The footage showed the Tarnished fighting demons with a sword that materialized from nothing. Showed them dying, then resurrecting seconds later completely healed. Showed them striking a Lord of Chanja greater demon that could unravel minds with a thought hand causing it genuine pain. None of this should have been possible. "The Ordo Malleus must be informed," said Brother Castian, the squad's psyker. "This individual represents either a weapon of incalculable value or a threat of equal magnitude." "Or both," Ralkan replied. He had fought for 3 centuries. He had seen things that would drive normal men to gibbering madness. He had learned that the galaxy was far larger and stranger than the Imperium's dogma admitted. "Bring them to the training cages. I want to see what they can do." The training cages were where Grey Knights tested themselves against combat servitors, practice drones, and captured Xeno specimens. It was a place of brutal, honest assessment. No politics, no lies, only the truth of blade against blade. The Tarnished was brought in, accompanied by Inquisitor Ven and a full squad of Grey Knights as escort. They looked around the chamber with curiosity, recognizing it immediately as a training ground. They had spent countless hours in such places in the lands between the tunnels beneath Stormvale, the sparring yards of Redmane Castle, the challenge arenas of Volcano Manor. Ralkan stood in the center of the cage, his nemesis sword deactivated but held ready. He removed his helmet, a gesture of respect, and addressed the Tarnished directly. "I do not know if you understand me," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But in the battle you fought as a warrior. I respect warriors. I wish to test your skill, not to kill you, but to understand you. If you agree, take up arms." The Tarnished heard the tone not threat, but challenge. They had heard it before, from bloody finger invaders and fellow Tarnished seeking duels. They understood. They nodded once and reached into the space where will became reality. The spectral blade formed in their hands, solid and gleaming, wreathed in faint golden light. Raukan activated his nemesis sword, psychic fire crackling along its length. "Begin when ready." The Tarnished moved first. They closed the distance in 3 quick steps and struck with a horizontal slash, testing Raukan's guard. The Justicar blocked, his nemesis sword meeting the spectral blade with a flash of gold and blue. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the cage. Raukan's eyes widened slightly. The Tarnished's strength was not Astartes level, they were baseline human, or close to it, but the technique was flawless. The angle of the strike, the weight distribution, the follow-through it was the work of a master. He countered with a thrust aimed at the Tarnished's chest. The Tarnished parried, redirecting the blade past their shoulder, and stepped inside Raukan's guard. They struck with an elbow aimed at his helmet, a move that would have stunned a normal opponent. Against ceramite armor, it did nothing. Raukan used his superior mass to shove the Tarnished back, creating distance, and launched a flurry of strikes: overhead chop, diagonal slash, thrust, feint, true strike. Each blow was delivered with the speed and precision of a warrior who had trained for centuries. The Tarnished dodged the first 3, parried the 4th, and took the 5th on their shoulder. The nemesis sword cut through their spectral armor and bit deep into flesh. They gasped, staggered, and died. The Grey Knights watching from outside the cage reacted with shock. Brother Cassian reached out with his psychic senses, expecting to detect a warp anomaly, a demonic resurrection. Instead, he felt only the grace, pulsing once like a heartbeat. The Tarnished stood, whole and unharmed, blade still in hand. Raukan stared. He had seen many strange things, but this defied even his experience. "Again," he said simply. They fought again. This time, the Tarnished was more cautious, more defensive. They had learned that Raukan's strength and reach were superior. They adapted, focusing on counterattacks, on punishing overextension. Raukan pressed the assault, using his power armor's strength to batter through the Tarnished's guard. He landed a killing blow, his nemesis sword piercing the Tarnished's heart. They died. They returned. And the duel continued. By the 5th death, Raukan began to understand. The Tarnished was not trying to win. They were trying to learn. Each death taught them something: his timing, his preferred angles, the openings in his technique. This was not a duel. This was a lesson, and the Tarnished was the student. By the 10th death, Raukan was breathing heavily, a rarity for an Astartes. The Tarnished was beginning to match him. Their parries were timed perfectly. Their counters exploited the microsecond gaps between his strikes. They were not stronger or faster, but they were learning faster than any opponent he had ever faced. On the 15th exchange, the Tarnished landed a strike. It was not a killing blow. The spectral blade lacked the power to pierce ceramite, but it was a clean hit to Raukan's side, delivered with perfect form. If he had been unarmored, it would have opened him from ribs to hip. Raukan stepped back and deactivated his nemesis sword. Enough. The Tarnished lowered their blade, breathing hard, sweat if they still produced sweat soaking their hair. They bowed slightly, a gesture of respect. Raukan returned the bow. It was not a Grey Knight custom, but it felt appropriate. He turned to his battle brothers. "This warrior is no demon," he said firmly. "Demons do not learn. They do not adapt. They repeat their nature endlessly. This one grows stronger with every death. They are what they appear to be: a mortal who has transcended mortality through discipline and will." Brother Cassian approached the cage, studying the Tarnished with his witch sight. The light above their head, it is not the Emperor's light, but it is holy. It is grace without dogma. Faith without church. I do not understand it, but I sense no corruption. Then what do we do with them? Asked Brother Hadrian, the squad's heavy weapons specialist. Raukon considered. We take them to the chapter. Let the Grand Masters decide. But I will make my recommendation clear: this one is a weapon, and the Imperium needs every weapon it can find. Inquisitor Ven, watching from the observation deck, smiled. Her gamble was paying off. But outside the ship, in the cold void of space, something else was watching. A fleet of vessels bearing the marks of chaos black and brass, decorated with skulls and profane symbols, was approaching. They had followed the scent of grace, the taste of that impossible light that had burned in the warp. They wanted it. They wanted the soul that carried it. And they were willing to destroy an entire strike cruiser to claim it. The alarms began to sound. Battle stations. Incoming hostiles. All Grey Knights to arms. Raukon locked eyes with the Tarnished through the cage's barriers. It seems your test is not yet finished. The Tarnished understood the tone. They had heard it 10,000 times before, in the moments before bosses appeared, before invasions began, before the world demanded that they prove themselves once more. They nodded, gripping their spectral blade tighter, and prepared to fight again. The strike cruiser Titan's Wrath was a fortress in the void, bristling with weapons and shielded by faith made manifest. But against the Chaos fleet now emerging from the warp, it was a lone candle in a hurricane. 12 ships, each corrupted beyond recognition, bearing the marks of all 4 dark gods. They had come for one purpose: to claim the soul that defied the warp. On the bridge, Raukon assessed the situation with cold clarity. We are outnumbered. We cannot win a void battle. Then we board them, Brother Castian suggested. Teleport assault. Strike their command decks, sow chaos among their ranks. And leave our own ship vulnerable? Raukon shook his head.
No.
We fortify here. Make them come to us. Inquisitor Ven arrived on the bridge, the Tarnished following close behind. She had insisted they be included in the strategy session, much to the consternation of the Grey Knight's command staff. They're here for the Tarnished, Ven stated bluntly. The grace light draws them like moths to flame. If we want to survive, we either surrender the Tarnished to them. No, Raukon interrupted. We do not bargain with chaos. Or, Ven continued, we use the Tarnished as bait. Let them come aboard. Funnel them into kill zones. And let this Undying Warrior do what they do best. Raukon looked at the Tarnished, who stood calmly despite the growing tension. You would fight? The Tarnished did not need translation. They nodded once. Then we have our strategy, Raukon said. All crew to defensive positions. Tech priests prepare traps and bulkhead seals. This ship becomes a labyrinth, and we are the monsters within it. The Chaos Fleet launched boarding torpedoes, massive, spiked projectiles that punched through shields and armor to disgorge their payloads of traitor marines, cultists, and demons. The Titan's Wrath shuddered with each impact. Deck by deck, the battle began. The Chaos forces came in waves. Traitor Astartes bearing the colors of the Black Legion, their armor decorated with blasphemous runes. Cornate berserkers, frothing and screaming, driven by the bloodlust of their god. Cultists armed with autoguns and explosives, their eyes wide with fanatical devotion. The Grey Knights met them with disciplined fury. Bolt of fire filled corridors. Nemesis blades carved through power armor. Litanies of banishment drove demons back into the warp. But the Chaos forces kept coming, driven by something beyond tactical sense. They fought with suicidal determination, pressing forward even as their allies died around them. They were hunting, and every wave pushed deeper toward the ship's core. Where the grace light burned brightest, the Tarnished stood in a prepared kill zone on Deck 9, a wide chamber with catwalks above and only 2 entrances. Grey Knights held the high ground. The Tarnished stood alone at the chamber's center, their spectral blade drawn, the grace above their head shining like a beacon. The first wave of cultists burst through the entrance and saw the lone figure bathed in golden light. They screamed praises to the dark gods and charged. The Tarnished moved through them like wind through wheat. Each strike was precise. Economical, lethal, a slash across the throat, a thrust through the heart, a pommel strike to the temple. They did not waste motion, they did not showboat. They simply killed, over and over, as the bodies piled around them. A chaos sorcerer entered, wreathed in warp flame, and launched a bolt of unnatural fire at the Tarnished. The Grace flared, intercepting the blast, and the fire dissolved into harmless sparks. The Tarnished closed the distance in seconds, their blades sweeping up in a diagonal arc that took the sorcerer from hip to shoulder. A traitor marine, massive and encased in corrupted power armor, charged with a chain axe. The Tarnished sidestepped, parried the axe, and drove their blade into the neck seal between helmet and gorget. The marine fell, gurgling. The Tarnished died when a cultist detonated a suicide vest, the explosion tearing them apart. They returned, standing in the same spot, and continued fighting. The Grey Knights watched from above with a mixture of awe and unease. This was not normal. This violated natural order, but it was effective. The Tarnished was holding a choke point that would have required an entire squad to defend. Brother Cassian, monitoring the psychic currents, felt something shift. They're coming. The leaders. I sense powerful warp signatures converging on this deck. Raukan activated the Vox. All units fall back to secondary positions. Tarnished. He paused. The Tarnished could not understand him, but they seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. They planted their feet, gripped their blade with both hands, and waited. 3 figures entered the chamber. The first was a Chaos Lord, a traitor marine who had served the Dark Gods for 10,000 years. His armor was a patchwork of trophies and blasphemy. His blade wept acid. The second was a greater demon of Tizin Tesh, a fluxmaster wreathed in flame and illusion, riding a disk of Tizin Ts that hovered above the ground. The third was a cornate demon prince, a towering monstrosity of muscle and rage, its skin brass, its eyes burning coals. They stopped when they saw the Tarnished, and for a moment, even these beings of absolute conviction hesitated. That light, the Chaos Lord hissed. It is what we seek. Seize it. The Dark Gods will reward us beyond measure. The demon prince roared and charged. The Tarnished met it head-on. The impact shook the deck. The demon prince swung a fist the size of a barrel, and the Tarnished rolled beneath it, slashing at the creature's knee. The spectral blade bit deep, and the demon howled not in pain, but in fury. This mortal should not be able to harm it. The Tarnished died, crushed by a backhand blow that pulverized bones. They returned. The Chaos Lord circled, looking for an opening. The Fluxmaster began to chant, weaving a spell designed to trap the Tarnished soul, to drag it into the warp where it could be properly claimed. The spell struck, and the grace flared so brightly that everyone in the chamber flinched. The spell unraveled, its threads burned away by light that was older and purer than any sorcery. The Tarnished attacked the Chaos Lord, their blade moving in a dance of perfect technique. The Chaos Lord parried, his millennia of experience barely enough to keep pace. They dueled across the chamber, blades ringing, until the Tarnished found an opening, a momentary overextension, and drove their sword through the Chaos Lord's primary heart. The traitor marine staggered, shocked. He had not expected to die here. Not to a mortal. He collapsed, and his soul was dragged screaming into the warp. The demon prince, enraged, grabbed the Tarnished and tore them in half. They returned. This time, the Grey Knights joined the fight. Raukan and his squad descended from the catwalks, their nemesis swords blazing. Together, they and the Tarnished surrounded the demon prince. It was a battle that would have been worthy of song, if anyone had survived to sing it. The demon prince fought with the fury of Khorne himself. It killed 3 Grey Knights, each a warrior of legendary skill. But the Tarnished kept rising, kept attacking, kept dying and returning, and each resurrection drained the demon's certainty. Finally, Raukan drove his nemesis sword through the demon's skull while the Tarnished struck from behind, their blade piercing the creature's spine. The demon prince shattered, its essence banished back to the warp. The Fluxmaster, seeing its allies fall, fled through a conjured portal. The chamber fell silent. Rauken knelt beside his fallen brothers, speaking the prayers for the dead. The Tarnished stood nearby, battered and exhausted, their blade dissolving into mist. Inquisitor Ven entered, surveying the carnage. "The Chaos Fleet is withdrawing. They've lost too many assets. For now we are safe." Rauken stood, his expression grim. "The Inquisition will demand judgment. The chapter will demand answers. This one," he gestured to the Tarnished, "has proven their value but also their danger. They attract enemies. They defy natural law. What do we do with them?" Ven met his gaze. "We let them go." "What?" "They do not belong to us," Ven said quietly. "They owe no allegiance to the Imperium. They fight because it is their nature, not because we command it. If we try to cage them, we become no better than the Chaos Lords who sought to claim them." Rauken was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You are wiser than I expected, Inquisitor." The Tarnished, understanding the tone if not the words, bowed to Rauken. The Justicar returned the gesture, and in the cold void of space, the Tarnished was given a small ship, a single-pilot craft with enough supplies to reach the nearest inhabited world. They left the Asterisk Titan's Wrath Asterisk behind, their grace light fading into the stars, a legend already forming among the Grey Knights who had witnessed the Undying Warrior. The world was called Nemesis Tessera, a broken husk of a planet on the edge of Imperial space. Once a thriving agri-world, it had been ravaged by an Orc Wa'og, a decade prior, then abandoned as strategically worthless. Now it served only as a way station for smugglers and pirates. The Tarnished's craft crash-landed there, damaged by debris from the earlier battle. They emerged from the wreckage, unharmed thanks to their unique resilience, and surveyed the landscape. It reminded them of Caelid, scarred earth, rusted ruins, the stench of old death. But where Caelid had been poisoned by rot, this world was simply empty, hollowed out by war, and left to decay. They began to walk, following the distant lights of what appeared to be a settlement. The starport was a sprawling mess of prefab structures and rusted landing pads, home to perhaps 3,000 Souls refugees, deserters, criminals, and the desperate. It was ruled by no one and everyone, a place where Imperial law was a distant memory. When the Tarnished arrived, they were met with suspicion but not hostility. Strangers were common here. The locals assumed the Tarnished was another drifter and left them alone. The Tarnished found a quiet corner, sat down, and closed their eyes. They were tired. Not physically, they could not truly tire any more, but spiritually. They had fought demons, inquisitors, and chaos lords. They had died hundreds of times, and they were no closer to understanding why they had been brought to this grim, dark future. The grace above their head flickered weakly, barely visible. That was when the sky tore open. A warp rift, massive and bleeding unreality, split the heavens above Nemesis Tessera. From it poured Chaos Forces demons, traitor marines, and worse. This was not a raid. This was an invasion. At the forefront of the assault was an Inquisitor, not a loyalist, a traitor. Inquisitor Matthias Cale, the Puritan who had demanded the Tarnished's execution, had fallen. Ven's mercy in his eyes had been weakness. The Imperium's tolerance of anomalies had been heresy. He had sought answers in forbidden texts, and those texts had whispered back. Now he served the ruinous powers, leading a warband dedicated to eradicating all threats to Chaos's dominion. And the Tarnished, the soul that defied the warp, was the first target. Cale descended on a Heldrake, a demon engine that shrieked across the sky, and his voice boomed across the starport via corrupted voxcasters. "People of Nemesis Tessera, you harbor an abomination. Surrender IT, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will burn." The starport's inhabitants panicked. Most fled toward whatever ships still had fuel. Some grabbed weapons, more out of instinct than courage. A few looked around, trying to identify the abomination. The Tarnished stood, the grace above their head pulsing in response to the warp's presence. Cale saw the light from his perch and laughed. "There. Bring IT to me." Demons descended on the starport like locusts. The Tarnished drew their spectral blade and moved to intercept. They did not know these people. They owed them nothing. But they had learned long ago, in the lands between, that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak not because it was rewarded, but because it was right. The first demon to reach the ground exploded as the Tarnished's blade split it from crown to pelvis. The second wave hesitated, recognizing the soul that had killed so many of their kind. The Tarnished did not wait for them to recover. They charged into the swarm, blade singing, grace flaring. Each strike banished a demon. Each defend there were many was followed by immediate resurrection. The starport's defenders, seeing this lone figure holding back the tide, rallied. A former guardsman with a broken lasgun found a power pack that still had charge. A gang enforcer grabbed a rusted chainsword. A tech priest activated a derelict defense turret. They fought alongside the Tarnished, not because they understood what was happening, but because the alternative was death. Cale watched from above, his eyes burning with warp fire. Impressive, but futile. He gestured, and a company of traitor marines teleported into the starport center. Black Legion, World Eaters, and Thousand Suns, united in their hatred of the Tarnished's grace. The battle became a slaughter. The defenders, brave but undertrained and under-equipped, died in droves. The Tarnished fought at the center of the chaos, their blade a streak of golden light, but even they could not be everywhere at once. A World Eater, frothing with bloodlust, grabbed a fleeing child and raised his chain axe. The Tarnished was across the battlefield in seconds, impossibly fast, and intercepted the blow with their own body. The chain axe tore through their chest. They died. They returned, standing between the child and the berserker, and drove their blade through his throat. The child stared, eyes wide, then ran. The Tarnished did not watch them go. There were too many other enemies. A Thousand Suns sorcerer conjured a spell designed to unmake reality itself, a working that would collapse the starport into the warp. The Tarnished felt the spell building, felt the air grow heavy with unnatural power. They could not stop it. They had no magic, no incantations, only grace. But grace, they had learned, was enough. They raised their blades skyward, and the light above their head exploded outward, a shockwave of pure, distilled hope. The spell unraveled. The sorcerer screamed as the backlash consumed him. The traitor marines, for the first time, felt something they had not felt in millennia: fear. This mortal should not be able to do this. They should be broken, corrupted, consumed. But they stood, shining, defiant, and every death only made them stronger. Cale descended, landing before the Tarnished with a thunderous impact. He had shed his humanity entirely, his body now a twisted fusion of flesh and demon. He carried a blade that screamed with the voices of the damned. "You could have served," Cale said, his voice a chorus of agony. "You could have been a champion, but you chose weakness. You chose mercy. Now you will die, and your soul will be torn apart and fed to the gods." The Tarnished met his gaze, calm and unafraid, and spoke in their own language. "I have killed gods. You are not even a pale shadow of them." Cale did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. He attacked. The duel that followed was apocalyptic. Cale's blade clashed against the Tarnished's, each strike sending shockwaves through the ground. The Tarnished died 7 times in the first minute, each death teaching them Cale's patterns, his weaknesses. On the 8th resurrection, they landed their first true blow, opening a gash across Cale's chest. On the 12th, they severed his left arm. On the 20th, they drove their blade through his heart. Cale fell, his body dissolving into warp stuff, his soul dragged screaming into the abyss he had served. The remaining Chaos forces, leaderless and terrified, fled through the rift. The rift closed. The starport was silent except for the groans of the wounded and the crackle of flames. The Tarnished stood at the center of the carnage, their blade dissolving, the grace above their head barely a flicker. They were exhausted beyond words. They had fought an army and won, but the cost had been immense. A hand touched their shoulder. They turned to see the child they had saved, holding a piece of bread, an offering, a thank you. The Tarnished took it, nodded, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, smiled. The survivors of Nemesis Tessera did not forget the warrior who had saved them. They spoke of the undying knight, the figure wreathed in light who had stood against an army of demons and prevailed. The story spread, carried by traders and refugees to other worlds, other systems. Inquisitive N heard the stories and smiled. Somewhere out there, her gamble was paying off. The Grey Knights heard the stories and added them to their archives, a record of the anomaly that defied categorization. The Chaos Gods heard the stories and seethed. The soul that should have been theirs continued to escape, continued to defy, continued to shine. The Tarnished left Nemesis Tessera aboard a salvaged ship, piloted by a grateful merchant who owed them a debt he could never repay. They traveled deeper into the Imperium, seeking understanding, seeking purpose, seeking a way home. But with each world they visited, they saw the same thing: suffering, war, oppression. The Imperium ground its own citizens beneath the weight of dogma and fear. The forces of chaos preyed on the desperate and the lost. Xeno's empires carved out their own territories, uncaring of the human cost. This was not a universe, it was a meat grinder, and the Tarnished, who had spent a lifetime fighting to end wars, found themselves in a realm where war was eternal. They stood on the bridge of the merchant ship, staring out at the void. The grace above their head, though weak, still burned. It had survived the warp. It had survived chaos. It had survived the Imperium's suspicion and violence. It persisted, as the Tarnished persisted. A new thought formed in their mind, slow and deliberate. In the lands between, they had fought to claim the Elden Ring, to become Elden Lord, to forge a new age. But that had been a war to end a cycle, to bring conclusion to a broken world. Here, there was no conclusion. There was only the grinding march of millennia, the endless churn of war and death. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the Tarnished had not been brought here to escape. Perhaps they had been brought here to fight. Not for the Imperium, which would cage and dissect them. Not for chaos, which sought only corruption and madness. But for the people, the individuals, the children who ran from demons, the soldiers who fought without hope, the refugees who fled burning worlds. The Tarnished had always been a champion of the lost. In the lands between, they had been Tarnished branded, exiled, forgotten. And yet, they had risen. They had become legend. Perhaps they could do so again. They turned to the merchant, who was nervously plotting a course through the warp. The man flinched when the Tarnished approached, still not entirely comfortable around someone who could die and return at will. The Tarnished gestured toward the star charts, pointing to a region marked with warning runes. The merchant frowned. "That's a war zone. Orcs, I think. Maybe worse. We should avoid it." The Tarnished shook their head and pointed again, more insistently. The merchant sighed. "You're insane. You know that?" The Tarnished smiled faintly. They had been called worse. The ship altered course, heading toward the war zone. Toward conflict. Toward suffering. Toward people who needed a champion. As the vessel entered the warp, the grace above the Tarnished's head pulsed, growing just slightly brighter. It was responding to their resolve, to their choice. The warp churned around the ship, but the grace held firm, a tiny light in an ocean of darkness, and the Tarnished sat quietly, sharpening their spectral blade, preparing for the battles to come. They did not know how this would end. They did not know if they would ever find a way home, or if home even existed anymore. But they knew one truth, learned through 10,000 deaths and 10,000 resurrections: as long as they could stand, they would fight. As long as they could fight, they would protect. And as long as grace burned, even as a flicker, even as a dying ember, there was hope. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, a single Tarnished walked. And wherever they walked, legends followed. They had been Elden Lord once, in a world of gods and demigods. Now, in a galaxy that knew no lords but tyrants, they would be something else. A wanderer, a protector, a light in the dark. They had no grand plan. No destiny written in stars or prophecy. Only a simple oath, whispered to themselves in the language of a world long gone. If this realm knows only war, then I shall oppose war itself, not with conquest but with compassion, not with domination, but with defiance. I will stand between the darkness and those who cannot stand for themselves. The ship emerged from the warp near a world under siege. Orcs, as the merchant had predicted. Billions of them, descending on an Imperial colony that had no hope of survival. The Tarnished stood, donned their spectral armor, and summoned their blade. The merchant watched them prepare and shook his head. You can't save everyone. The Tarnished looked back, their eyes calm and ancient, and though the merchant did not understand the words, he understood the intent. No, but I can save someone, and that is enough. They descended to the planet's surface in a drop pod, the Grace above their head shining like a star falling from heaven. And on that world, where war had seemed inevitable and defeat certain, something changed. A warrior appeared, wreathed in golden light, who could not be killed, could not be broken, could not be stopped. The orcs called them Da Shiny Git and learned to fear the sight of that light. The Imperial defenders called them the Undying Saint and prayed for their return whenever demons appeared. The Inquisition called them dangerous and debated whether to hunt or recruit them. The Chaos Gods called them the one who escaped and sent ever more desperate forces to claim them. But the people, the ordinary citizens of a galaxy that had forgotten mercy, called them simply hope. And in the 41st millennium, hope was the most dangerous weapon of all. The Tarnished walked on, from world to world, battle to battle, death to resurrection. They carried no banner. They swore no oaths to terror or the Emperor. They were alone, as they had always been alone. But in the darkness between stars, in the quiet moments between wars, the grace burned, faint, flickering, fragile, but persistent, always persistent. And that, in the end, was enough.